shirt is so funny.
Bro.
No.
Bro,
I
where do
was
you
like
get
blurring that.
Where did you get that?
This was on Etsy. What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 3 of the K&B Podcast. It's your host, Westend. We got Muus and Heider here. And today we're going to be talking about workflow. So this is related to music production. It's not a technical subject, but workflow to me is pretty much everything that you do as a producer to get from a track from nothing to a finished track. So it's really important. And the cool thing about workflow is that producers all have their different way of approaching it. They all have their different kind of methods for writing music and starting songs and finishing. And there's definitely no right way to do it. And I love, as a producer, listening to other people and seeing, what they do and trying out different workflow tips in my kind of routine. But yeah, workflow is super important because if you can get a really good workflow, you can increase the quality of your tracks. You can be more consistent with the music that you put out. So, there's not a huge variety in the quality there. And you can get really quick at making music, which can be super important. A lot of times you'll have deadlines for something, or you just, you want to be that producer that has a ton of really good demos. Those are the guys that always get their tracks signed and they have a ton of options. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. And I thought a great starting point would be to kind of see how you guys start your tracks. If you have any, templates, if there's like a certain, process that you do the drums first, but yeah, maybe one of you pick it up.
I feel like it changes. Sorry.
I knew that was
like
gonna happen. I was like, I'm gonna say one of you, and then both of you are gonna say at the same time. And...
Yeah, for sure.
All right, Michael, you go first.
All right, I'll go. I don't know. So I used to have like a pretty strict template in terms of like how I wanted to start my tracks, but recently I've just been having a lot of fun just opening up like a fresh Ableton. One thing I do think is important though is like when I go into a session, I try and have like some sort of like direction and focus like before I even start anything. Because if I just kind of like start like picking samples and trying to like make something, in my experience, usually an hour or two goes by and I'm just like, I hate this, or like I'm not really interested in like continuing on.
Where do you get that like direction? Like you said, like
yeah, totally. Like it kind of depends. Like honestly, some days when I'm not like feeling production, I'll open up Splice and find some samples that excite me. Like if I can go and do a session with the vocal, obviously that's like best case scenario. Even sometimes just like a kick drum will like excite me, which sounds mad funny. Like just like certain like samples just to like get me at least going, or even like, okay, I want to kind of make a track that's like in this style, just like something to give myself direction in that first like hour and a half to 2 hours of just like getting ideas out and creating. I think helps a lot because I mean, there's literally a billion different things you could do in Ableton. There's so many decisions to be made that if you just open it up as like a completely blank template with no idea of like kind of where you're headed, I find that I usually just kind of like float around and don't get anywhere like useful, I guess.
Yeah, it's like you want to limit the possibilities because like if there's too many options, then and I think that's like why a template can sometimes be great because it kind of like leads you in a certain direction. But I think we could talk about templates more as well later because like that's how I do it.
Yeah, I just put the last video that I did was kind of a little bit about my template, but I do have like, sends and returns set up and certain like, workflow things just to like make my life easier in terms of like, the initial EQ presets that come out, or like, when I open up another MIDI or audio track, I have it set to -6, just stuff like that. But in terms of like grouping and template stuff like that, I just haven't been on it in a while. Like I totally have templates, but I just haven't.
Can you tell our listeners real quick how to do that in Ableton, the default audio tracks?
Yeah, for sure. It's really cool. Like with Ableton, like you can completely customize like pretty much any plugin or audio track or MIDI track, like when it loads up. So for me, like I use Simpler like 90% of the time when or not 90% of the time, maybe 80% of the time on a MIDI track. So I have it set to whenever I open up a MIDI track, a Simpler and an EQ comes up every single time because I'm always using Simpler and there's always going to be an EQ on a track. And the way you do that is you basically just add all the plugins that you want onto that chain, and then you right click on the channel, and then I believe it's like the bottom option, it says like save as default MIDI track. And you can do that with an audio track as well. And then you can even do it with individual Ableton plugins, which is great. So if you, for instance, like use a compressor a lot and like you, or for like a side chain, right? Like instead of having to open the compressor and then open the arrow and then click side chain turn on, you can set it to whatever you want. So a side chain turned on with EQ turned on with the threshold down a little bit with the makeup gain. And then if you right click the top of that plugin, you can say save as
default settings or
default preset, I think it is.
That's sick. So every time you know that.
Yeah. So like what I did was like, if I was using a compressor for a side chain, I just saved like a side chain preset for the compressor. So when I need it, I just type in side chain instead of like compressor, and it's just like makes my life so much easier.
I have all my channels that do that. Whenever I create like a new MIDI channel or a new audio channel, I always have my EQ and my compressor already set.
Yeah,
I know I'm gonna use them, so
it
makes sense to already have them.
Yeah, can you do it with third-party plugins?
I think so. I've never tried actually. I just use like the default ones because I know they're gonna be easy on the CPU, so they're not gonna create any problem. But I never tried. But probably 100%. I'm not a fan of templates, to be honest. I always start from a blank project. What I usually do, I think, as a preparation would be like sample selection. I have my folders with my favorite samples, and that's where I start from. So that's the kind of preparation I have.
And how do you organize those folders?
I basically have my packs divided in like the vibe they have. So like I have my like Mayroom Tech House or deep tech, whatever melodic stuff, and I go there and I know that I'm gonna find that type of sound. So it's quite useful.
You don't take, for example, from those individual packs, you don't take individual samples out and then put it in like a new folder.
To be honest, no.
Keep it in the pack. Yeah.
I have my folders for the packs. I have the full pack in there.
Yeah, I do something similar with sample organization. I use I don't know if you guys, but I mostly just use Splice for a lot of my samples. I do have packs that I kind of, you can put the shortcut on the sidebar, but Splice is super great because it's like all meta tagged. So, you can look up keys really quickly. You can look up genres and like other keywords like, fills, for example, or percussion. You can do that in Ableton as well. You can type in keywords, but the meta tags in Splice can be really great. And like one thing I did recently, which is great for like starting a song, is I in Ableton you can pretty much any sample or any plugin, you can assign a color to it, and it'll go to like a color tab on the top. So what you can do is you can organize plugins like this. So I have like plugins that are all my mixing plugins, and they all get red. And if I need to grab a mixing plugin, I don't have to open my plugin folder. I can go right there and grab like whatever. And you can do that with drums as well. So like you can maybe put like green or something as your favorite drums. And, as you're going through sample packs, if you know that these are drums that you really like and you want to use them again in the future, just throw the green on it and it'll show up on the top. So I think you get like 7 colors in Ableton or something.
Yeah.
It's not a crazy amount. I wish it was more, to be honest, but
yeah, I wish it was more.
Yeah.
I do that too. If
you get too many, then it's not going to be as fast, I think.
It's true. It's true. Yeah. I use the tags a lot for, I use Splice a lot, but I honestly do a lot of like keywords and just kind of like search through like packs and stuff. Yeah. But I find that a lot of times when I'm like running through samples like that, I come across a lot of samples that I really like the sound of, and I use those colors. Like I use red as like my favorites color, and I will tag it as red just so I can like have it somewhere to like come back. So if I'm looking for like a top loop, I like find one that I really like, but it's like doesn't quite fit, I tag it red, and then it like all goes to that folder and that helps too, because if I'm ever stuck, like I kind of have a folder of like samples that have like at least caught my interest. So it's like it's a good way to kind of like keep,
it's like a reminder app.
Totally. And I also keep like the favorites tab for like a lot of the plugins that I use like all the time. So like EQ8, Kickstart, like
filter,
just like
or something like that.
Filter, auto filter, like everything, like those like top 5 plugins are just like, I just want to type in delay on the search bar and click favorites instead of having to search through like plugins folder or plugins, audio effects, like all that shit is just annoying. I like saving time. Like if I can save like clicks, like that's the way to go for sure.
I think it did recently, which I think it's great. Like it saves me a ton of time. I have like my favorite packs, and I turned them into drum racks. Like I did like one drum rack for the hats, one drum rack for the claps, one drum rack for the percussion and stuff like that. And it's super easy. I have a folder with my drum racks, and I just type in, I don't know, perks, and I get 8 bucks with perks, and I just put it in and scan through them, and it's super easy and super fast.
So do you do that? Are the drum racks already set up, or do you grab them all in the session?
No, they're already set up, so I could just go, okay, so I want these back percussions, and I want to try them out. So I just drag it in. I write my MIDI, and then I can scan through the.
You change the MIDI for each sample or whatever.
I just change a note and I get another sound.
I think Zen World did a video recently on like reasons why MIDI drums are better than audio drums, and like I was always like an audio like is better kind of person. I still kind of, it's kind of a habit for me, but like there's just a lot of workflow things that you can do with MIDI that makes it way easier. Especially like a huge part of tech house production is sample selection. It's like probably one of the most important things because it really affects the mix, it affects the vibe. So if you are in a workflow that's not, it makes it difficult or time consuming to change samples and try new things, you're more likely not going to do it. And then, you're more likely just going to stick with that first sound you picked, which oftentimes may not be the best one. So, I think it's important to start to like realize, look at your workflow as a producer and be like, am I limiting myself in certain ways? And one thing I wanted to say before I forget was, I think it's really important for workflow to have a balance where, I use a template, and sometimes I feel like that restricts myself from thinking in different arrangements or thinking in different instrumentation. And a lot of, at least for me as a producer in my, 10-year career of doing it, a lot of my best tracks, it's like happy accidents that you come upon. So it's like samples that you wouldn't think. So, what I was trying to say is that I think it's important if you do have like a favorites folder that, it's great. You can go to that for some stuff, but so much of great production comes upon just trying stuff out and like finding things in areas that you wouldn't necessarily think to find something. So you don't want to restrict that ability of like stumbling upon something.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I was going to say too, like MIDI is so sick for like drums and stuff. I've been using Simpler because
you sounded like the biggest like bro, like for a second you're just like MIDI is so sick, like a surfer dude. Sick. Like
MIDI is so sick though. It's so cool because like it basically lets you use audio like in more of like a synthesis way, like with the one shot mode and classic mode, and you have like attack, decay, release settings and like filters and stuff. Like I think like the next video that I do will probably be like all about Simpler, because like I put bass lines in there from like one shots or loops, like hi-hat samples that I keep the MIDI notes short, and like use the release to kind of like extend the whatever, and then like filters and stuff. Like you can really change audio into like something completely different just off of that. Like honestly, I think Simpler is like my favorite like synth if or instrument if we want.
That's gonna be useful to me too, because I'm super rusty on the actual controls. I like it for the selection, but I hate to work on the sound. So when I found sound, I usually just bounce it to audio, and that's a thing I miss from Logic. There is no bounce in place, and that's Ableton should get that. But I always
freeze and flatten the same as isn't freezing and flattening the same as bounce in place, or no?
Yeah, but you lose the track actually. With bounce in place, if I remember correctly, creates a new track with the bounce.
Yeah, it does.
So you keep the original.
Yeah. So
that's the one thing Logic's got.
Yeah, because I think it's good to, as a producer, it's good to limit yourself, but you still should have the option if you want to go back. And I because it's a balance game. I think you should not have like a whole world of possibilities. You should have like your limited things that are gonna work, but also you need to have the possibility to branch out a bit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I would like, especially when it comes to like plugins and stuff. Like when I was like younger, like I felt like I needed all these like tools to like produce, but like I look at what I'm doing now, and I honestly probably use it like maybe like 5 or 6 like third-party plugins like religiously, and other than that, like I usually stick to like Ableton stock, and there's like so many plugins like I've spent money on that I just like don't touch,
Same.
And so I think like it's good to like learn the tools that you have at hand, like front and back, and like use them perfectly, because like I don't know, it just going along off your point of like limiting yourself. Like it's just nice to like have like your tools and just like be able to use them and like no bullshit, like just get shit done.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times for inspiration, like with me, you know, I can sound design, but I'm definitely more of like a preset filter kind of guy. So like, you know, sometimes when I'm not inspired, I'll be like, oh, let me just spend $30 and get a new pack and get all these sick sounds and kind of get inspiration from that. And that kind of moves me to like my next area of like workflow that I wanted to ask you guys about, and I think would be, you know, sick to discuss is so like, you know, we're talking a lot about like saving time in Ableton, and that's great, but you know, when do you guys actually sit down to produce? Like, do you have a schedule? Do you do it a certain number of times a week? Do you, you know, like to produce where you have like a big chunk of time in front of you where no obligations, or are you able to kind of like fit things in smaller increments? Yeah, I just wanted to like see how you guys do it.
I start this time. I really don't. I'm not the best at this because I'm really bad at scheduling stuff, to be honest. But
yeah, you almost missed this podcast. So.
No, I didn't. I knew I knew what was going on.
Like, I'm drunk. I'm coming from dinner. I'm drunk.
I mean, I'm Italian. What should I do?
Yeah, Italians are always at dinner.
Yeah, exactly. The thing is, I have sometimes like weeks where I'm like 12 hours in the studio, like making music the whole week, and then I have a month that where like I barely get into the studio, which is quite bad. I think you should try to find a balance because you don't want to get burnt out, but you want to be consistent with the output. So what I usually do when I'm on a good like time management period, I would start like at 9 a.m. to 12. I don't know, I sort it out. I see if I have something from the previous day, or if I want to check out what I did, or if I want to start something new. So then I'll just start some ideas. And I remember a tip from Zombie Disco Squad in a course he had on Sonic Academy. And it's all about like doing quick ideas, like 30 minutes ideas. Like you put down a groove and you do like 3 or 4 of them and see what works, and then stick with what works, and then so go on with that.
Put a timer or something like that. You say 30
Not
minutes.
Really, but I know I'll have like 30 minutes, an hour to do a groove. I'll do a few of those, and then I decide, okay, this is cool. Or I don't know, maybe I find a super sick sample and I'm like, okay, this could go somewhere, and then I just start working on that. But the thing is, at the start of the day, I try to get as many ideas as possible, and then the rest of the day is like, okay, let's try and turn this into a track.
Like see what the best idea is, and like flesh it out, and you know, the other ideas go into like an idea folder or something you can go back to. How about you, Mike?
I just usually just get rid of those.
Just get rid of them. You're like, fuck it.
Yeah, I have too many unfinished already.
Yeah, my inspiration strikes at just like really random ass times. Like it could be 9 a.m. when I wake up, or sometimes on like a Sunday night at 8 p.m. and then I'm up like all night just because like something excites me. It just kind of depends. And I've been trying to like listen to like my creative brain, you know, instead of like trying to like I don't really work well when I'm like give myself like a date and time. Like, okay, bro, you're gonna produce from like 9 to 1 p.m. I just kind of like let my like kind of brain decide like when it's time to just like hop into a session for like 8 hours. And that's something like recently I feel like I've been doing, because I used to like have to balance like production with like school and like getting, you know, going to class and like getting homework done and shit like that. So I like had certain pockets a day like where I had to produce or else not produce. But now, since like most of my days are just like up to me to figure out like what I want to do, like I'm just letting kind of the ebb and flow of like the creative mind just control like when I produce.
But do you find yourself being more productive now or before?
That's a good question. I think shit, I don't know. I feel like I was more productive then, but I'm a lot happier with like the music that I'm putting out or putting together now. It just seems like a little bit more like focused and just like matured as like obviously, you know, you get better as it goes by. But I personally work better when I have like, or I'm more productive when I have like a full schedule, like when I have shit to do, or else I tend to just kind of like procrastinate and hang out until like I decide, you know. But like last night, like me and some friends went to a bar to watch the basketball game, and then like we came home smoked a little weed, and then I hit the computer at 9 p.m. and I was up till 5 a.m. just like cooking. Like it just depends. Like it's just all depends.
I'm definitely more like you, Michael. But I think the important thing I'm kind of noticing is also that, you know, not everyone that's producing has like the freedom or like to produce whenever they want. And, you know, when I was working and producing, you know, I would usually produce at nights because I would get home from my job. And for me as a producer, like if I'm starting a new idea, I don't like to have anything on my calendar, because it can take me a few hours just to get warmed up in the studio and like get myself kind of like going. And like, this is something that I think we could do another podcast on, but like there's a psychological, I don't know, phenomena, but it's called like a state of flow. It's kind of like, you know, if you ever play a flow, like a great way example is like you play a sport, you don't even like think about playing the sport, you're just kind of like locked in, or like a video game's the same way. So a lot of times like producers and anyone that does like creative work, like writing, they can get into this like state of flow. So usually it takes me a few hours just to kind of get in, and it's like the mouse is like a extension of your arm, and you are Ableton and all that. But I need like definitely like a lot of hours, and I'm usually like a late night guy. I like producing like, you know, 10 o'clock at night to like 5 in the morning. But I don't actually like, you know, and sometimes I feel guilty for this. Like I don't produce that often. I really only produce when I know I have like something I want to do and I have an idea. I think a lot of times, like if you're producing because, you know, if you're just starting off, you want to spend as much time in the studio and get those 10,000 hours in where you are comfortable and you're not really learning anymore. I mean, you're always learning, but you kind of know what you're doing. So in that case, like I think doing 45 minutes or an hour when you have it after work, it's great, because it's like, just get those loops down, get whatever. But for me, it's like a full project. I have to really think about what I'm doing. And
do you find that like you're just a little bit more like picky on like the things that like excite you and the things that you want to like put hours into, just because like your time's a little bit more limited, and you know your ears are mature, and like you kind of have an idea of like your sound?
Well, one thing I noticed is that like the percentage of the music that I make in the last, let's say like 2 years to like what comes out on as a Westend track, it's like a higher percentage. So there's less demos for me that don't see the light of day than it used to. And so like to me, that's like evidence of that. Every time I go to produce, I'm more likely to get something that I'm like happy with, that I want to put out, than not. And it took me a while to get to that state, but like now I can kind of like, you know, and that doesn't say like every time I sit down in the studio, it's like, oh, I can make a dope track. A lot of that shit, it's, you know, I can make something I can play almost every time, but like, is it going to be super sick and up to my standards? Maybe not.
Do you think that just comes with like time? Like just the more you do, you just this
time and confidence, and kind of like, you know, for me, I'm not producing, you know, sometimes it's like an emotional release or a creative thing, but it's like, it's my job, and like I know what I need to be doing, kind of. So it's almost like even if I'm not in the mood for something, you know, I'll still sit down and do it. You know, if I have to finish a remix or something. So I've kind of trained myself to do it regardless, but that's just the way I do it. You know, and like where you were saying, Phil, before about getting like what ZDS said about those ideas, like I know Claude Von Stroke, like he's talked about doing like 10-minute ideas or maybe 1 hour ideas, where you basically spend one day just doing every hour a bunch of ideas, and then you have like 10 of them, and then you basically like pick the best one and you can turn it into a track. Because a lot of times if you just kind of commit to the first thing you do, it's like, I forgot what it's called, but there's this,
you're limiting yourself. You like to tunnel vision, I think. Something like tunnel
that. Vision, and
also you don't see the other possibilities.
But you know how like when you listen to something the next day, it always sounds shittier. It's like when you're in it, you're more biased to like it because you weren't making a track before, and it can really mess with you, because
so it's better to have 4 or 5. Maybe one is decent the day after.
Exactly. And like once you do a couple ideas, then you can at least have something to compare to. You're like, oh, this is definitely like tighter than this, or you know.
I feel like it's good to try not to get like too like emotionally attached to like certain ideas. And I think at least starting out, for sure, I remember thinking that like every idea that I started that was like even a little bit worth a damn, I felt like obligate, oh, I have to finish this, like this has to like be a release. And like as I've kind of like grown a little bit and like kind of, you know, obviously gotten better as well, I tend to just like not have any sort of like attachment to like ideas. Like they just, I don't know. I think it's better like if you're stuck on something and you're working on something for like months and months and months, and it's not like, or not months, like weeks, and it's like not working. I feel like that energy is better like put into like, you know, moving forward instead of like trying to like fix like
For sure.
old little shit that like, I don't know.
But also when you're just starting out, I think it's a good habit to have, like to finish stuff, because you gotta learn how to finish it.
Yeah, 100%. That's the other part of it too, for sure.
But once you,
well, I was gonna say let's talk a little bit about like finishing tracks, because I think that's like a really good workflow thing.
Yeah, that's the worst part.
Yeah, it's hard for sure, but like that's a very good point though, about like getting in the habit of just finishing tracks front to back and shipping them and just moving on to the next one, because I don't think you necessarily want to get in the habit of just like having an idea, getting to like, you know, a 32 bar arrangement and then just not really know it, like having like 40 of those versus like, you know, 8 completely finished songs front to back. I feel like I'd much rather have like the 8 finished songs front to back than just like a shit.
Yeah, that might not be great, but at least you
for
put in the time, you learned how to finish them. So
do you guys have any tips or tricks for finishing?
No.
Yeah, I do actually. I picked this up from Dylan Nathaniel a year ago, maybe. He was saying how the way that he starts his ideas is he goes, and I've tell this to a lot of like my production students, but he does like 16 bars of like a breakdown and then 16 bars of a drop, and he builds it out completely. So effects, automation, like everything, like completely built out. And once you get there, your track is pretty much done, other than obviously you got to copy and paste, you know, like the actual arrangement and do like, you know, even some more like automation. But that at least gets you to a point where you're not in a loop, like you have an actual like idea that's kind of like, you know, have tension and then drop out. And then once you're there, it's like, all right, let's just like copy in the intro, let's put the first breakdown, okay, you know, second breakdown, big build, big drop, outro. Like that has really, really helped my workflow, just because I try and get to like the arrangement not as soon as I can, but I find that like in a session, I try not to leave the session in just like an 8-bar loop, just because if I come back to it, I completely lose interest. Like I try and like get the actual like arrangement down. So having that like
me too.
32 bars of like build and drop, it just lets me kind of see the finish line a little bit sooner.
Yeah, I want to have at least like a build up and a drop, and then I come back to it. A thing that I find myself doing when I want to finish a track, when I have like the whole arrangement done, is like, okay, I'll leave it there for a day, and then I come back the day after, and I just listen to it with my notes open, and I just write down everything that comes to my mind, and I'm like, okay, so this sounds like shit. That transition was not good. I need to fix that bass in that place there, all that stuff. So I get like, I don't know, 20 points, and then I go one by one and try to address them and do that again. When I find myself like struggling to find something, then either it's a good track and it's finished, or it's a bad track but it's finished. But either way, it's finished. So I know I'm done with that, and if it's gonna be good, then great. If it's not, I'm done. I feel good with myself. I did what I needed to.
Yeah, no, I definitely do something similar. Like, but for me, that's like kind of when I'm like done with the whole track, and I think that's what you said. Like, you know, when everything's there, and I'm like, because I get like OCD and I get anxiety about, because a lot of times you're not listening to your track start to finish until like the end, right? You're kind of skipping around and picking different points. So I get like crazy because I'm like, oh, what if something doesn't sound good, and like I skip over it. So I have to listen through completely, write the notes, do that again like a few more times. And then what you were saying before, Michael, about like the kind of like having that structure, I think with house music and a lot of electronic music, it's really great because especially house and tech house, it's like very repetitive. So, you really can kind of get that build up drop and then do some slight variations. And it kind of, that's what works in the genre, because you kind of want to get in this like trance on the dance floor. I think what's great is like having that concept as like a tool in the arsenal, because I noticed I used to do that a lot, and what would happen was that I would get kind of like boring arrangements where everything would be very similar, because you're kind of 16 bar this, 32 bar this, 16 bar this, 32 bar drop. Like it almost, you're kind of forcing the track into that structure. So I think it's like good to have that as like a tool. And if you're like, that works for this kind of track, let's do it and finish it. But I think if you're trying to have like new arrangements and different styles, like I think like listening to a lot of other people's music and like reference tracks can be a great way to finish, because a lot of times, you can have a great idea and you're like, okay, what did some other artists do to keep the rest of their track interesting? And like, you don't have to copy what they did, but you can be like, oh, something new comes and that thing stays and then changes. And then you can do that with any sound that you want. So
reference tracks I'd steal arrangement from reference tracks all the time.
Yeah.
Not so much recently, but early on, it's like I would completely just try and study exactly like where shit was happening, and like every 8 bars something changes, and I'll be like, all right, cool, I'll do the same shit.
Yeah, it's like, and I think what you said about like not recently is like for me as well. Once you listen to a lot of tracks, you kind of get these like arrangements in your head, and then you can kind of be like, oh, this is going to be the kick and bass go for 16 bars just by themselves, and then this, or this is going to be one where it's like, goes right to a breakdown. Like you can kind of like pick these arrangements, be like, this one makes sense for this
and like DJing too probably helps that too, just because like I don't know, it works at the club, and like if you can fuck around and like test some shit out on the weekend, like that's really cool.
Do you guys have like, oh sorry, what were you gonna say, Phil?
No, nothing. Being able to test stuff is like really, really useful. But
do you guys like when you're producing, you guys both kind of, we talked about this in the first episode, like finding your own sound. We talked a lot about the kind of the workflow that you do when you're producing and the samples you have that, and like, the types of synths you like to add and whatever that kind of creates your sound. But like when you're producing, do you kind of have like, okay, I'm going to do the drums and then, this kind of bass line and then these kind of stabs work, like, because when a few years ago, I was doing like this more Dirty Bird call and response sound. So I was kind of had like a flow where I was like, okay, once I get a good kick and bass, now I know that at the first hit, it's going to be like a stab synth. Then there's going to be like some lasers. Then there's going to be some percussion sounds, and kind of like, it was almost like a flow where like I could kind of follow that. Do you guys do that at all or not really?
Blowing bubbles at the club.
Yep.
Heider. Heider, what do you think?
What?
I don't know who's starting this time. Michael,
distracted us, Michael. I'll repeat the question. The question was, is there like, while you're producing, do you think, oh, for the Muus sound, I like to do these kind of like synths and then vocal chops and then this or something like that? Or is it like more blank canvas where you just kind of like whatever?
That first like hour for me is pretty much like I'm just trying to find like a really interesting drum groove, and like I feel like for me, like I think a lot about call and response when it comes to drums, not like necessarily, at least in that first hour, not necessarily just like synth stuff. Like, so I'm like, if I can nail down like a really just interesting groove that you could listen to for minutes on end, like that's when I know that like I'm ready to like kind of start adding like a theme to it if I don't already like start the session with that theme.
But that is like a workflow thing, because like you're basically saying like when you start, you are kind of looking to establish this like percussive or drum like call and response, and like that's like you're kind of like sitting down with the intention that you're gonna like get the bongos and this kind of like working. So I think that is like a workflow.
For sure. I just for me, like groove is definitely like the most important, at least how I approach my tracks, just because like you could listen to a really interesting drum groove with a kick and a bass for 6 minutes, and it would be like, if you can, not 6 minutes, but like for a minute, and like you're just like feel some type of way about it, like that's when I know that it's like, all right, I'm gonna keep building this out for sure. But also sometimes like I'll like sit down with the idea of, all right, I'm gonna make like a really like minimal groove, just like really chunky and fast, and then I'll end up making like an Eli Brown type of track. Like it just kind of depends. Like I don't know.
You never know where he's gonna go. Where it starts.
Do you feel restricted by like your past releases and genres? Like sometimes I feel like this, it's like I feel like I have to make the track kind of fit something that makes sense with like my brand versus like
kind of
what I think could be cool at the moment. Like if I have like some crazy like techno acid synth that like I haven't used in a Westend track before, I'm like, oh, I gotta make this work in like a more subtle way or something. Or do you feel like fuck it, like I'll just make the track however it is? it's a different topic, but
yeah, I feel like I got into like kind of an habit on how I make tracks, and then kind of limits my production. So I'm trying to get out of that. Actually, I'm like studying new style of tracks and trying to get try to open my horizon.
I think it can be really good for like consistency, because if you can consistently and like you'll hear this a lot, you listen to a lot of people's music and you're like, oh, this song sounds exactly like their last release. Like sometimes people use the same drum samples. Like I know John Summit has tweeted about this before, like why, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, like using similar samples across tracks and similar patches for basses.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, if you want to just sit down and make a track in 6 hours. But I don't know. I don't really like I don't really feel like putting that out, because I feel like it's like more like a technical job than an artistic job. So I'm like, what value am I bringing to the table other than like, okay, it's a kick, a bass, and a clap, and they're grooving. Nice.
Yeah. It's like a different approach,
Yeah, I still feel like at least for where I'm at, I feel like I don't try to think about it a lot. Like I don't know. I still feel like I'm trying to figure out like what even that means, like having a sound, or like what that sound is. Like in 2021, I released like a lot of just like big, like driving, like commercial tech house stuff. But then like, like previous releases have been like completely different, and like some stuff that's coming out later this year is like completely different. So I'm trying to like just kind of like let that go and just like let the art kind of like come to the surface, and hopefully people are going to love it. But I think like through that, you kind of like, whether you know it or not, like certain processes that you do or certain ways that you produce, like just kind of end up being your sound, or samples that you use. So I feel like even though like I have like a really like vibey kind of style track coming out later this year that's like way different than like previous stuff, but I feel like you can still kind of sonically pick out like, okay, it kind of sounds like the shit that I've done in the past, whether I know it or not.
Yeah, I think in the other podcast, have other people telling me, okay, I know this is your track because it sounds like you, and I'm like, I don't notice that, but they do. So
yeah, me too. I like never noticed shit like that, but I just think it depends, like the way you EQ shit, just like I don't know, like it all.
I think you mentioned that before.
Yeah,
and I made fun of you for
like. Yeah, I remember that.
Your EQ is your sound. It's those Q curves and stuff.
Or like your thermal preset on your drums is like.
It's true. Mix downs definitely have like sounds, I think. But I do want to stay on the topic of workflow a little bit. So another thing I feel like is super important with workflow is like, this is like a lot. We just talked about like creative kind of stuff and getting yourself in the right mind and like how you set up Ableton, but like, do you guys have any like stuff like in the real world, in the physical world that you do? Like, I think having like a super comfortable studio situation, that doesn't mean you need like a studio, but like a place where you can go to work, and that's like your workplace. It's like it's not the same place that you play video games. It's not the same place you watch TV. So for me, like I invested in like a Herman Miller chair. It's like, I think the best chair ever, but like an Aeron, like, oh, there we go. The blur background is cutting it out.
I have the shitty IKEA one.
Yeah. So like, yeah, you don't, if your fucking back hurts every time you go to sit down to produce and you're hunched over and
facts.
Your monitor is too small, like those are all things that are going to like mess up your workflow and basically make you slower and make you, just like not want to produce. So I think like, you want to analyze what your situation is as a producer and just kind of be like, all right, what's the most important? Like, having a good monitor is really good, like important. You want to be able to see what you're working on, having a good chair so you can sit for really long sessions. I'm trying to think of like, if you guys have any other examples.
Yeah, that's 100% like comfort for sure. Go ahead.
I have one which is not like really related to the place I do my work, but I haven't been working out for the longest time. I started working out a bit like daily.
You're talking about like working out like muscles?
Yeah, like the gym. Yeah.
The gym.
I started like working out like every day, like I don't know, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, not even that much, but it gets me like into a new headspace. And I'm like, okay, now I'm active. And I think that really helps a lot. And another thing, I moved my studio. My studio right now is in my basement. It used to be like in the room like right next to where I sleep, and I was like, okay, why should I go there? I can just like off on my bed and do my shit on my laptop. But just having like a place where I have to walk to and do my thing, like it's really helpful.
that's something bad for me because I use like the same monitor for Call of Duty and for Ableton. So it's like when I'm sitting in that chair, I could just like change the input and go to the Xbox, or I could stay in Ableton. That's probably why I've gotten a slight video game addiction in the last couple months, so it's not good. So that's another thing. But like also distraction. So I'm bad at this, but I know people will like turn off their phone or like go on airplane mode or on your computer. Notifications turn off, because like it's super easy. Like if you're in Ableton and like you get a text or an email about something and you start checking that, and then like social media account, you start checking stories, like fuck that.
That's why I like the nighttime. I was talking to Sid about that a while ago. He was like, dude, I produce like at night all the time because nobody's trying to hit me up. Like the world's like turned off and it's just like me and my like work.
I just don't reply. I'm just like,
I gotta reply immediately.
I'm addicted, bro.
I reply later. Like people know that if I'm not replying like for 4 hours, then I'm in the studio. And it's fine.
You're a stronger man than I, bro. Because I'm just like,
I'm just a bit like, I don't know,
focused.
My head can do two things at the same time. So if I do one, that's it.
Well, one thing that I really value from like a comfort perspective, I guess, is like portability. Like I have like kind of a studio setup. It's just like a MIDI keyboard and like monitors that I rarely use. But I just like love like grabbing my laptop, like going down on the couch with my AirPods Pro with noise cancel turned on and just like fucking around. Like I just love like being able to.
I've definitely burned my dick off having my laptop, my old shitty laptop overheat on my stomach, and I'm producing like this.
Now I just got that M1 shit, and like the battery life is fire, and it barely heats up. So like I'm chilling. Like I can go to the coffee shop without a charger for like a few hours and just like make some beats. Like
I have the 2018 MacBook. It's the worst ever. Like that, the worst moment to buy a MacBook was 2018 probably.
Yeah, it's like in
between. But mine got stolen, so I couldn't choose.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I think portability is like a definitely, some people, they only like to work in their space at home. Like I think Sid, like he won't work on the road. Like he's got a 6 studio. Everything is like,
top of the
plugged in, and like you have to have your UAD plugged in to use the plugins, all this stuff. But like for me, I don't produce while I travel for like DJ gigs that much. I'll do mostly like edits and kind of, mashups and stuff like that. But like I was in vacation Costa Rica, and that's a lot of times like when you're in an environment like that where you don't have like everything, it's not like super comfortable, you're not at your desk, like I've noticed I've made like really good work when I've been on vacation. I did like a track with Google there, and like
that track's fucking banging.
You can get inspired really like being in like different environments. So it's a thing to think about. If you think you're the kind of person that would like to be portable, getting a laptop and like having everything mirrored, that's like an annoying thing too. So getting all the same plugins, like usually they'll give you 2 copies, but sometimes it's like,
that's why I like the laptop. Like some people have like Mac Pros or like Macro Pros. Like this is like, these computers are pretty much like desktops, you just plug them into a monitor and you're good to go. But
I have a problem that I hate to produce from headphones. I cannot do that.
Really?
So I need a monitor.
Bro, I've been producing. I've been producing on my last the last 3 weeks on like my AirPods and these like DJ headphones. I haven't even touched like the expensive open back.
I cannot do that. Like I've started doing these, like getting used to it, because like doing lessons, I cannot do it on my monitors, so I'm kind of getting used to it. And my friends got me a sub pack a few months ago.
Oh,
that's great.
Damn.
I think secondhand. Yeah.
Good for you.
Still sick. But headphones I don't know. I cannot do that for too long, and I have problems working on bass and stuff. So I understand dynamic as well. So many times if I work on headphones, then I have to check on my monitors, because sometimes I fuck up the volume.
Yeah, I still reference on a lot of things, but I like producing music on like real world mediums, as in like, okay, the people that are going to listen to my track on Spotify are probably going to have their AirPods in at the gym. So like I do spend, I don't even know if like that, I don't know why I like it or if anybody else does or if it's just me, but I've made like literally 3 full tracks on my AirPods just like in the last couple of weeks.
And you won't mix them on your headphones? You do it all the mixing on your AirPods?
I think I maybe checked like once on like the monitors and it sounded cool, and I played it out the next weekend and I didn't hate it. So
yeah, send me the track. I'll
We'll
play
see.
EDC, and if it sounds like dog shit, then you're
We'll
All right,
see.
bro.
We'll see. We'll see.
please play my track at EDC,
We'll
bro.
put you at
There
the
go.
test.
yeah,
Send you some track for
and
EDC.
that's a win. That's a win-win.
Yeah.
What was I gonna say? Is there any, like, when you guys are making a track, are there any like mixing kind of checklists that you guys go through? So like for me, for example, a couple things I always like check are I put like a Voxengo MSCD on the master, and I'll kind of isolate what's going on in the stereo field. So if I start hearing a lot of like low end in there, or if like something's like really loud and wide when it shouldn't be, like the clap is like louder than the vocal, then I'll like go and adjust that. So there's definitely like, for me, some checks. Like another thing is like, you know, a very common one is listening to your track in mono. People do, you know, checking how loud the kick and bass are with each other. But I was wondering if you guys had any like mixing.
Yeah, my steps usually are like, first thing, kick and bass. I want to have my kick at my level that I know the mix is gonna work. So I keep my kick always at the same level, -10.
Yeah.
Then I get the bass to the right level. Then I start with the drums, so clap, hats, and percussion or whatever.
Do you bring it all down in the mix, or do you just like tweak it?
I mute everything, and then I unmute one by one just to check it. Like I don't even do it at the end of the track. I do it when I feel like, okay, so this is kind of the final big loop. Yeah. And then I get my levels right, and then I get into arranging.
But you don't bring the fader all the way down and then bring it up.
No. Maybe I'll. I mean, if I cannot find a level, I usually go way down, and then I start going until I notice it's too loud. Then I go back down again. But I usually like I'm like around the right level, so I'm not always too off.
Where do you put your bass? Where do you put your bass compared to the kick?
Depends on the type of track and the type of bass, actually. If it's like more a show bass, rolling bass, it's like -3, -5 usually. If it's for like more like percussive, like Clooney bass line, it's usually kind of close, like almost there. But it depends. The thing I'm quite precise about is the level of the kick. That's always the same because it's the bass level for my mix.
So you kind of gain stage around your kick as being the loudest, and then once it hits that peak, you can kind of move everything else up.
Exactly.
Yeah. Gain staging is another thing that I don't do, but a lot of people do that makes it, it's like definitely like a nice workflow tip. Like Noisy does that. Like everything goes to a certain level, and then you kind of like mix from there.
Yeah. The only gain staging I ever do is setting the kick, and then the kick's usually the kind of the main thing that everything kind of follows. So it's easy enough.
Because everything revolves around that. So I mean, get the loudest point right, that's fixed, and then the rest just comes by itself.
For sure. I got a workflow thing for my master because I do check in mono like often, but I have a utility on my master, and I don't know if you guys have ever messed around with like the key mapping on Ableton, but if you go onto the utility and then you right click on the mono button, and then you go to edit key map, you can choose a key on your keyboard. I've actually chose the like apostrophe, the key right above tab, and then like the Enye thing.
We all know what an apostrophe is, bro.
Yeah, my keyboard is different.
Enye, bro.
My keyboard is different. It's Italian.
Oh, true.
I have accents.
That's actually a spaghetti piece on his.
Oh yeah, the meatballs, the wine,
the pizza.
Yeah, I basically press it and I get a guy at my door.
Yeah,
Papa John's there.
No, Papa John's is shit, man. It's Italy. Come on.
Yeah, Papa John's
with highest standards.
That's good pizza, bro. I'm not gonna lie. Papa John's.
Yeah, that's
like Papa John's like get outed by the company or some shit.
I think he likes he likes to party. That guy, I think.
John, yeah, it looks like it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. But yeah, anyway, you can choose like any key, and I chose the apostrophe. So every time I click that on and off, it turns mono on and then turns mono off, and that's key because
that's sick. That's like a button on like a thing or whatever on like a console or whatever.
A console, yeah. So it's like if I'm like checking my like drum group, and I want to check the mix in mono, I don't have to click into my master chain, click mono, go back to the drum group, fuck with things. It's just like I can boom on off. Nice.
I think that's Ableton is great for anything workflow because there's so many things you can do, and I feel like we didn't even like get to dive into like all of them, but there's like you can save racks, you can key map things.
That's a thing I do all the time.
Racks is sick. Like I love
like racks. You like big racks?
Big racks, bro. The biggest fucking racks.
The biggest.
Yeah, like making like I've done a video on like effects racks and like the macro stuff.
Yeah,
and
macro
there's so
mapping
many,
is sick.
There's so many cool like products.
I
out
use
there
your noise rack all the time. Like
yeah,
that's
the
fucking
noise knobs, yeah, game changers.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, dude, Ableton's sick. There's so many cool products. Like people make so many cool like instruments out of like Max for Live or macro, whatever it is. Like it's just
yeah,
Ableton.
It kind of goes back to like the sample organization stuff, but like, here's the best workflow one I could just think of. So instead of having your projects, if you're in Ableton on like your desktop or somewhere, put them all in like a folder and then put that project folder on the sidebar in Ableton. So basically what you can do is you can like open the project file and, while you have the project that you're working on, you can kind of see your old project files and it'll show you all the channels and all the groups. So you can actually drag the groups into your project file. It doesn't even take that long to load.
No.
And it'll, so like, a lot of times, like instead of coming up with like drums completely from scratch, and I just need to see if like a vocal works with like a bass line or whatever it is, I'll just drag the drums from like my Ain't Me Without You remix, which I know like I spent a really long time on. They all sound good, and drag them in there, and it's like you have them. You can always like delete them, but it's like great for workflow because it's like, why spend 30 minutes just making a shitty drum loop when you can kind of
I do that a lot for like pretty much every snare roll that I have, because I like automate a lot of things on that snare roll. So I'll just like snag it from like another track and it's like the same shit, and that's just the easiest thing.
You can also you can copy automation, or you can I saw this on like a tip somewhere on like Instagram, but basically you can have like generic automation saved that is going to work for like certain buildups. Yeah, I forgot how it worked exactly. I mean, I know you can definitely copy automation in Ableton, right? So you can just copy the curves or whatever and move them over. But there was something he did where it was basically like you just have the automation set and then you can like kind of like reset it. But
trying to think of other like just like quick hitter like dope little features. Like
there's so many. That's the thing. It's like there's literally.
I feel like a lot of people don't know that you can adjust the volume of like your sample sounds with that like knob by the master. You have your master fader, and then you have like the blue fader, and that controls the volume that the samples come in. So if you're like
when you're previewing stuff,
so if you're like mixing super low in your track and like you're trying to pick out samples and it's just like loud as fuck, which is super annoying, you can actually bring that volume down.
I think that's in the session view, right? Or it's in clip.
I've never
view,
seen it.
Yeah, it's down there. I'll
okay.
Yeah, I wish I could have a screenshot.
No, I think if you want to be in the clip view, it's like where the crossfader would be on the master, I think.
Yeah, well, it's where like the master like fader is. It's right next to it. It's in blue.
I see it. I just opened it. Yeah.
So
cool. I didn't know that.
I usually keep that down a little bit for sure.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I never had that problem though, because I always have some limiting going on in the master. So
yeah.
But
sure.
Cool.
I think that's a great place to wrap it up, unless you guys had something else you wanted to say on organization.
Just get into the studio, make music. That's the best way to develop a workflow. I always tell that to students when I do lessons. Just try to develop some habits in your production, and it will make everything like easier and come together quicker.
Yeah, I would say the same thing too. Like I try and like just get into Ableton at least once a day, whether it's for like 30 minutes and I want to like go like get organized or something. That hour usually turns into like more, so I just think it's about like getting your reps in every day and like making sure you're getting that like 1% better every day or whatever they say.
One thing we didn't actually mention: shortcuts. Learn your shortcuts. That's
how do we forget shortcuts? I feel like for all of us, it's like we don't
second
even
it's automatic. Like you just press them and you don't even notice you're doing it, and it's gonna make your workflow way faster. So
Ableton has a lot of shortcuts, and like I'll learn new ones all the time, but the shortcuts are huge. You can also, if you don't want to memorize the shortcuts, there's like things you can put on your keyboard, kind of like a plastic cover, and it has like Ableton specific, so it has all the shortcuts. But definitely learn your shortcuts. So yeah, thanks for tuning in to this week's episode, guys. If you guys have any workflow tips, you can always hit us up on social media and drop it on the comments on Instagram, because we would love to learn some more. And
I would put this on YouTube.
I think so. Yeah, this is
going to YouTube. Put them in the comments.
Put it in the comments on YouTube. Like and subscribe. You know how.
Yeah, smash that like button.
Yeah, and join Kick and Base, because we always have a lot of like videos related to workflow and templates. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you for this is the third, right? So
third
next month for episode 4.
Oh yeah.
Hopefully we have Millean, but we don't talk about that. So. All right.
Yeah, we don't like that guy too much.
Bad work.